Chair of the Committee on Housing and Executive Administration. The time is 12:03 p.m. on Wednesday, the 9th of June. I'm calling to order this confirmation roundtable to consider the nominations of Suzanne Slater and Charles R. Lowry to serve on the Housing Production Trust Fund Board, and Dr. Amber Hewitt to serve as the Chief Equity Officer within the Office of the City Administrator. Today's roundtable is being broadcast on the committee's YouTube and will be available on both the YouTube and the council website immediately following the roundtable session. The first resolution under discussion today is PR 24-185, the Housing Production Trust Fund Board's Susan Slater Confirmation Resolution of 2021. This measure would reappoint Susan Slater to the Housing Production Trust Fund Board as a member representing financial services industry for a full term ending on January 14, 2025. The second resolution is PR 24-186. It would reappoint Charles Lowry to the Housing Production Trust Fund Board as a member with significant knowledge of an area related to the production, preservation, and rehabilitation of affordable housing for lower income households for a full term to end on January 14th, 2025. And the third resolution is PR 24-201. Dr. Amber Hewitt, Chief Equity Officer, Confirmation Act of 2021. This would appoint Dr. Hewitt to the inaugural position of the district's Chief Equity Officer to serve at the pleasure of the mayor. She will be located within the Office of the City Administrator. We will first hear from our Housing Production Trust Fund Board nominees. As you know, the Housing Production Trust Fund, commonly referred to HPTF, is the district's major tool used to produce and preserve affordable housing. It is a special revenue fund administered by the Department of Housing and Community Development and Finance Division. And the goal of the HPTF is to provide gap financing for housing projects affordable to low through moderate income households. Because the trust fund provides critical dollars towards financing developments affordable to our city's residents most in need, it is important that board members are experienced in distinguishing the suitability of all the financial instruments at their disposal. The trust fund resources are provided to bridge the financial gap between various lending sources as acquisition loans and as grants to help further the development of affordable housing projects. The fund is critical to the district's ability to obtain the recent goals set for the production of 36,000 housing units by 2025, of which 12,000 would be affordable units. Since 2019, more than 7,000 units have been produced using the trust fund resources, but we still have a way to go, especially to produce more units affordable to extremely low and very low income households, since 50% of the expenditures from the trust fund are mandated to produce this critical housing resource. To ultimately reach our goal would require greater adaptability in our real estate marketplace. Today's roundtable is an important opportunity to discuss priorities and perspectives with our renominated advisory board members. All right, our first nominee is Ms. Susan Slater. She has worked as the president and CEO of Habitat for Humanity. She is an associate dean for executive programs at the University of Maryland, College Park, and she also served in Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan's office and at the White House Office of Management and Budget. Ms. Slater is a Ward 3 resident and holds an MBA in public-private finance from Cornell University, as well as a BA from Smith College. Ms. Slater oversaw the conversion of a troubled public housing complex into a successful mixed-income neighborhood in Ward 7. And she was appointed to replace a previous advisor midterm and has served in an advisory capacity for 2 terms since April 2016. She is finishing her first full term and is reappointed, and this will be her 3rd term. Charles Lowry, our 2nd nominee, is being reappointed to serve as a member with significant knowledge in areas related to production, preservation, and rehabilitation of affordable housing for low-income households. He has had an extensive career working in policy with an emphasis on fair lending. Currently, he is the Director of Legislative Policy and External Affairs at New American Funding. He holds a JD from the University of Michigan Law School and a BA in economics from Stanford University. Mr. Lowry was first appointed July 10, 2018, and is seeking reappointment for a 2nd full term. I look forward to discussion today, which I am confident will be informative to the members of the committee and viewing members of the public. So with that said, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And I understand we have no public witnesses for these nominees. Is that correct?
That is correct, Councilmember.
All righty. Thank you very much. Okay, we will now turn to testimonies from our nominees. And we'll start with Ms. Slater, if she is in the room. All right. Ms. Slater,
Yes,
I want to,
Councilwoman,
if you would raise your right hand so I can swear you in. All right. Do you swear and affirm that your testimony and any statements that you make before us today to be truthful and complete?
I do.
All right. Thank you very much. And of course, you can proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Councilwoman Bonds. I am very honored to be here at this moment and I want to thank the mayor for renominating me to serve on the Housing Production Trust Fund Advisory Board. I am very, very pleased to be here. It has been a great honor to serve as the chair of the HPTF board for the last 4 years. Before I discuss my tenure in this board, I'll give a very brief background about myself, not repeating what you just said. And thank you very much for that introduction. I've had a long-standing interest in affordable housing and in the capacity of nonprofit organizations, government at all levels, and the private sector to respond to the ever-urgent affordable housing needs of the District of Columbia and indeed the nation as a whole. I've spent much of my career studying, teaching, and writing about housing policy, both as an associate dean at the School of Public Policy at University of Maryland at College Park, and as a board member of nonprofits in DC and in surrounding jurisdictions. As you noted, my academic background is in finance, and I have an MBA from Cornell, but before my tenure at the University of Maryland, I handled issues while I worked on Capitol Hill relating to HUD, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and so forth at the U.S. Office of Management and Budget in the Office of the President. I also worked for U.S. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan on the Senate Budget and Senate Finance Committees. Over the years, I've been very honored to receive awards in municipal finance, an award as a presidential management intern, and awards from 3 federal agencies. The one I'm most proud of is the Secretary's Award from HUD, because housing is my great passion. To be recognized by HUD was a great honor. As my background shows, I've focused on these issues over many years, and especially on issues relating to public housing and the creation of mixed income and workforce home ownership. I'm passionate about these issues for several reasons. I do not believe any social problem can be solved, substance abuse, educational achievement, child welfare, even health issues associated with the pandemic, without first ensuring a safe, decent, and affordable home. This is the basis, I think, of public policy. In my current position as president and CEO of Habitat, I see families flourish once they achieve their dream of stable homeownership. Both children and adults show educational gains, their physical and mental health improves, and most importantly, they become even more productive citizens who can make contributions to society. The Housing Production Trust Fund is, of course, the central source of government funds for affordable housing in the district, and it couldn't be more important at this moment, especially now with the possibility of increased resources. The trust, and I was here earlier this week talking about those increased resources in front of Councilwoman Bonds as well, and I was very honored to do that. The trust fund's resources have been transformational. My professional life is characterized by seeing opportunities for leveraging public dollars with private investment and the conscientious contributions of the nonprofit sector. While the $400 million that is the possible increase in the HPTF sounds like a significant allocation of resources, these resources must be strengthened manyfold through strategic partnerships with nonprofits and the private sector. In other words, we all have to contribute. Through my years in government and academia, I know the limitations of what government can do alone. That too is important in my vision for the work of the trust fund and in my 4-year experience with it. The fund's board is made up of very impressive people with great experience in all the sectors that must work together. Under my tenure as chair, the board now meets regularly again. It had a brief hiatus prior to my coming, and works collaboratively with the staff at DHCD, the key agency that carries out all of the legislative mandated goals of HPTF. Importantly, although I have nearly 10 years experience working directly with DHCD through DC Habitat, I've had the opportunity through serving on the board to learn about the policy goals and frustrations of that central agency even more thoroughly. My vision for the trust fund is to enhance the effectiveness of DHCD and affordable housing efforts generally in the city by continuing the already strong track record of leveraging private investment with each of the public dollars. Equally important is the need to forge strong partnerships with nonprofits and advance their capacity to work effectively with private entities, as well as DHCD. Historically, HPTF dollars work hard in all 8 wards of the city, but the emphasis has been in wards 1, 5, 7, and 8. And it has not as effectively served the housing needs of residents with incomes less than 30% of AMI. The challenge is to reach the group both at 30% and below. And as the councilwoman mentioned, half of the 2022 dollars will be devoted to that particularly needy group. However, the trust fund is also going to be continuing work on the important programs that serve other housing needs, serving all the way up to 80% of AMI. The challenge is to get these funds more equally distributed across the city. And that is much of my work at DC Habitat. We have there are many efforts across the city to increase affordable housing in the wards that have not been as well served by HPTF dollars. And the comp plan is a very significant tool for making sure that happens. There are many competing budget priorities, especially given the circumstances of the pandemic. The HPTF is extremely fortunate to have been to be under consideration for more of these resources. And I'm deeply honored to be before you in this confirmation and welcome the opportunity to serve with the impressive people on the HPTF board. What I hope to bring to this important position and to continue to bring is vision tempered by experience of ways HPTF funds can achieve the greatest possible impact for DC residents whose needs must be met. I also bring the ability to listen carefully to the leadership of DHCD, other board members, and of course, members of the city council, and the dozens of groups I've worked with in DC that synthesize new ideas and approaches, forge consensus, and ensure that HPTF dollars are spent wisely and well. Again, I thank you, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I feel like I wrote it for you.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you, Ms. Slater, for being with us today. I really appreciated hearing your goals and learning about your intentions and some of the things that you've been able to accomplish. As you know, you're no stranger to this committee and to this effort. And you really are applauded for the outcomes that you've had with Habitat for Humanity and just your leadership in this arena. So now that I've smoothed you, let's talk about where we are and how do we get to some of the goals that you are concerned with, of course. Could you I think when you testified last Friday, you indicated that if you were confirmed for reappointment, you would do things a little differently in order to meet the need of the 0 to 30% requirement. And so can you talk a little bit about some of the things you think we can do to really get down to the 0 to 30%? Because it's a tough group. It's a tough amount that we have to endeavor towards.
Well, yes. First of all, you at the council have legislated that 50% of the 2022 funds must go to this group. So it's not debatable. We have to figure out how to do it. And the first step that I think is going to be very effective is the linkage with the local rent supplement program. Many of my colleagues who serve the group from 0 to 30% have had intense frustrations trying to build units that lack that linkage. And I think we've made a tremendous policy gain by realizing that you need to have the funding from LRSP in the mix. That will in turn spur more development of units for that 0 to 30% group. I'm certain of it. The other part of all of this is I strongly believe that you don't want to concentrate people that are very low income in any particular place. I think it's much better to have affordable housing spread out evenly across the city. So I'm a big advocate of the goals of the comp plan and the efforts to especially get more affordable housing in towards 3 and 4. So I think the trick here is to get developers to not concentrate buildings, with LRSP, but to try to integrate that into buildings that are more mixed income. And that is a very difficult thing to do. It means that you have to be very creative in your sources of finance and so forth. But I also think it's a possible thing to do. And with the zoning changes that I think we're going to have with the new comp plan, I think the challenge is big, but I think we're going to be able to reach it. So I have a lot of faith that colleagues of mine who are very excited about all this are going to get very creative, and there's a lot of energy on it.
Thank you very much for that. I have more questions about how we meet this challenge, because I know it's so critical to success. And you should know, when the council set the goal, it was based on what community was saying, and listening to community, trying to understand that we just had to do business a little better, a little differently from in the past. You have frequently mentioned the challenges. I think you have spoken to them, but are there challenges from within that you see, that, let's say, with the trust fund, the administering of the trust fund, or with the council, or relationship building? I don't know. Are there other challenges that we may be facing that we probably need to address in order to get this money out the door for our extremely low-income households?
Well, the problem that we're going to have is that the funds for 2021, we really only have the proposals. The trust fund staff only have the proposals that have been already submitted, and there was a concern that a number of those proposals were not going to be able to be funded. In other words, there were more proposals than the trust fund could fund. For FY 2022, the difficulty is going to be for people to put proposals together that really hit the nail on the head in terms of reaching that legislative goal of 50% of 0 to 30. It takes quite a bit of time to put these proposals together, no matter how proficient you are. And the sources of financing take time to assemble. So I think people now are just very excited, and they're racing to get their proposals in. It'll mean that the staff at DHCD will have quite a challenge. So if the council can see their way clear to any small increase in DHCD's budget, that might help a little bit, because the staff is working very hard, and there are a lot of very talented people there, but the volume will go up, and we want the work to continue at a high level. In my earlier testimony, I applauded Director Polly Donaldson on how she's been running the agency. But I think with an increase in resources of this magnitude, it will be tough with just just the exact same staff that she's got. So the council may want to be a little bit lenient on some of that. Some portion of that 400, I know, would go towards the DHCD funding, but a little more latitude to get over this hump might be part of it. So the two challenges. One is getting proposals from the private sector, from the nonprofit sector, and then having the staff capacity to get all the underwriting done, and to make sure these proposals are looked at thoroughly. There's quite a time lag on all this, and I'm sure that's frustrating to the council because everyone wants to see immediate results. But in my experience, from start to finish, it takes about 4 or 5 years from the minute you have the idea of a project to the time you've got people living in what you imagined they should be living in. So I think the 2022 money will probably take, a couple of years before we actually see the results in the numbers and reaching that 50% goal.
Well, thank you very much for that. I have to now ask then, how do you see us handling the local rent supplement dollars over the estimated 3-year period? Should it drop down into, the system we've used for the last few years? It drops down into repairs for public housing properties, or should it just be set aside and held at bay, much as capital funding is held? How do you see us managing that?
Well, this is a little bit out of my area, but I've studied this area a bit and have some views on it. I honestly would have a talk with HUD about all of this because the Poor Housing Authority has now lost its current leadership, and the coordination has been a frustration on all sides on this program. And I think we can't be the only city that has this problem of where does the money go? Repairs, which are desperately needed, a capital fund that you hold, or does it start to go to individual units that are being built? The funding is needs, I think if the goal is to create more units, then I think it has to be clearly allocated and specified as being, allocated towards production of more units. I'd hate to have that negatively affect what is really a dire situation with public housing. And hopefully the Biden administration understands this. And again, I know the mayor and I know you, Councilwoman, are very active in a lot of housing circles, where I honestly think the issue is almost a federal one in terms of saying, look, here are the needs. They haven't been met. And here's how we would like to use the funds. I think it should be some allocation towards new units, should be very clear.
Okay, I was asking based on your expertise and experience, and I did recognize that question was outside of the realm of the trust fund, but I look at this housing affordability as being sort of like one ball of wax, and so much is rolled up in it. So I appreciate your comment. Thank you so much. I wanted to ask this process that we, the trust that the trust fund uses to deal with the selection process. Are there any ideas for improving the selection process? It seems like it is a process that those who apply, they're on pins and needles and what have you. And meanwhile, we're trying to produce and trying to spend the money. And I just wondered if you have some ideas for improving that process. One, making it transparent, much, I'll say more than it is now, apparently. But at the same time, making sure that we are getting our dollars worth, that we're really getting the units that we need, as you say, located around the city and not just in one particular area, and that they are growing our supply of affordable units that people can occupy and as soon as possible.
Well, I've testified in front of other members of the council on this issue, and I think the staff works very, very hard and very thoroughly. They handle each proposal very thoroughly. They try to have as many RFP rounds as possible. It does turn out to be about 2 a year, although sometimes they can pull off a third. You're right, developers are on pins and needles because there is quite a lag time between when you put the proposal in and then how they process all of it. From a legislative perspective, I would say you really do want that thorough analysis, to make sure that the project is going to be viable and that indeed it's going to see its way through to serving the public and that each dollar is spent well. That just takes time. And I think that, again, a little bit of leniency in terms of how many people are able to work on it. Director Donaldson has some very, very talented people working on it, but with the increase in funding and the increase in the mandate to serve the 0 to 30, those are tougher proposals. Because to make sure the dollars are spent well, it's going to be even harder to make sure that due diligence is done. And so I think the only way to get developers off of pins and needles to increase it, decrease the amount of time between the time you submit the proposal and when you get an answer, is probably it's a resource question within the agency, because those staff people that we have the opportunity to get to know on the advisory board are all very, very competent and hardworking, and it's just they're trying to make sure the dollars are spent well. So I think that's part of the answer. In terms of the transparency, I know other states, other jurisdictions have more public disclosure on scoring and so forth. One good piece of news about how DHCD does it is if you don't get funded the first time, very often they'll do a debrief and then you get funded the next time or later on. Hopefully you still have control of the property, but it's quite a balancing act to get the necessary HPTF funding. And it is awkward. There's no two ways about it. It's not a quick assurance. And It's especially awkward, frankly, in the homeownership piece. That's even more awkward than the rental part, because the rental has more volume. But I would say resources within the agency and perhaps some kind of analysis of what other jurisdictions do. I know there's been some work on looking at what other jurisdictions do. You don't want to hold up a developer's proposal as a C- proposal. That the board of directors of that organization would feel pretty bad about about that. But you know, a debrief that is a little more public might be helpful, and disclosure of how many proposals came in speaks volumes, because the ratio of those that got funded to the number that applied shows how tight that 100 million. It sounds like a lot of money, but it really isn't. And so that 100 million has been tight. Now with more resources, I think on the legislative side, you're going to be able to expect more funding, and but we have to do it fast. FY 2022 is right around the corner here, so I would say there can be a little more disclosure of the debrief, a little more disclosure of the numbers of applicants versus those that were funded. Especially some disclosure of the number of developers who were able to put in 0 to 30 units in. That kind of disclosure would be helpful, I think, to the council, because what you care about is reaching that 50% mark.
Right.
So those kinds of that kind of information might be helpful legislatively.
No, thank you. Ownership is a big, important area, I think, for not just families having the opportunity to build wealth, but as a way for, quite honestly, I've mentioned this many times before, it pays off. It's a big dividend to our community, since we pretty much live off of our taxes and fees. And so the more ownership opportunities we have, the more we have a diffusion of our revenue base in more hands or families, and therefore I think it works better for our entire community. So for ownership, that seems to be a very tough arena. I'm just wondering what kinds of projects are you maybe anticipating over the next 2 or 3 years that could also expand ownership opportunities?
Well, Habitat is extremely busy. I have a pipeline that will keep us busy for the next 3 or 4 years. We're very excited. We just won an RFP with a group of other partners to renovate the Langston Slater schools, and Habitat will be putting 12 homes into that development. There are 2 historic schools, as I'm sure you know, on P Street, right off North Capitol, and we're going to be building 12 homes right in Truxton Circle, in between rental units. And that's what we've started to do. We've started to partner with private developers and other like-minded nonprofits. And we're also going to be partnering with the Douglas Community Land Trust. Those 12 homes will be part of a community land trust. And that will increase the affordability, well, that'll enhance the affordability of those homes. And Truxton Circle is quite an excellent location for affordable home ownership. We do a lot in, traditionally, we've done a lot of our work in Ward 8 and in Ward 7, and the opportunity to move, and also a lot in Ward 5 in Ivy City. But I think the opportunity to move into Northwest is, well, we're right on the border of Northwest, but we're a few feet over. But the opportunity to work in Northwest is very exciting to us. We also built 34 homes in the Skyland neighborhood in Ward 8, and we're breaking ground now on 8 more townhomes this month. And we are building 17 homes in Ward 7 that will serve anywhere from 40% of AMI to 80% of AMI. Again, I like to do mixed income projects, and I do some cross subsidization. And that happened in Ivy City, where we've built over 40 homes, where some of the homeowners actually were in the 30% area. But with all the subsidies we got from Housing Production Trust Fund and Federal Home Loan Bank and so forth, the rent that people were paying was higher than what their mortgage payment is. So Ivy City, we built over 45 homes where we ran the gamut from 30% to 80% as well. And we got quite a lot of subsidy from both the private sector and the government. And that's what I was talking about in my testimony. I like to work with both the private sector developers, my colleagues in the nonprofit sector. And when you put a development team together like that, you can really have more impact. You can win an RFP a little more handily. So those are just a few of the projects that we're working on. We're also working with church groups because a number of churches are quite interested in having affordable housing on their land. And they're especially also interested in land trusts. So they hold on to the ownership of the land, and they give us a 99-year land lease. And the Douglas Community Land Trust then takes stewardship of those homes after we build them. So we've been twisting the habitat model to meet urban needs and to meet DC needs in every way we can think of. So those are just a couple examples of what we're working on.
So do you see the Douglas Land Trust model expanding into other locations, since their goal is to maintain affordability? So do we really call it ownership? Because usually when people think of ownership, it's a process where, I buy the house and then I have the house that I can go into perpetuity, or at least the whatever equity can go to my family if I maintain that property. And I think the land trust model doesn't do that. The equity is maintained by the land trust company or entity. And so how do we feature that as an ownership model?
Well, there is a formula for equity gains. And when a family needs to sell, there is some equity gain according to the formula for that project. But it's analogous to the ADU restrictions where there's been affordability of 15 years and some affordability covenants that even go to 30 years, depending on which program you're in. And over the last 10 years, I've had 15-year affordability restrictions and now some longer ones, depending on what program. So I would say the land trust isn't, it's a good question. Is that really ownership? Well, it's ownership in a number of ways. For one thing, it gives the stability against rent increases. You're paying a steady amount and you own it, and you are not subject to market fluctuations, assuming the family stays there. And my experience at Habitat is when somebody gets a Habitat home, they definitely stay there. We have very, very little movement out of a Habitat home. The equity gain is less in the land trust model, but there is some. And what people also gain is the stewardship of the property. What we're experiencing, especially with small condo associations, is that a lot of times the small condo associations, especially if everybody is a little bit unsure on how to run a condo association and how to handle the payments and so forth, that's a citywide problem, I think. There aren't adequate reserves. There isn't sometimes adequate leadership because people are so busy just trying to make a living, and they just don't have the experience on leading an organization like a condo association. So there are all these things that the land trust solves. It gets you out of that condominium association problem, because they are the stewards of all of that. So there's, I would say, it's analogous to the city putting those long-term restrictions on having to sell to another family at the same AMI, for example, or those restrictions of 15 and 30 years. It's certainly not like an open market situation, but it's for people who otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to buy. So my experience is a lot of people are just so thrilled to own their own home that they intend to stay there. The savings that they get against rental increases and so forth makes up for that.
Yes, it does. And I guess it's sort of a hybrid form of the cooperatives, limited equity cooperatives, which are ownership, but I think there's no real outstanding tax benefit. But you're saying through the land trust, there would be some tax benefit.
Yes, people would own their units. And the thing is, we're dealing with people who are probably going to be taking the standard deductions anyway. So depending on what income level, although we're experimenting, frankly, with having some people at higher income levels in the land trust, to cross-subsidize some, to allow us to get to lower AMIs. So that is to be seen, if we can pull all that off, because that P Street area is very, very expensive. And to be able to buy a unit there is going to be very attractive to all different income levels. And so we're experimenting on whether or not upper income people will buy into that land trust and what we'll have to do about that equity question, because they're going to demand a higher equity gain. The good news about the Douglas Land Trust is they're very flexible. So we intend to carve this all out in a way that works for mixed income. And so that gets to your question on, is there an equity gain? We're going to have to come up with some formula that works for everybody in that land trust.
Yes, I was thinking the same thing, so I thought I would try and touch on that. I think it's an exciting arena for the public that wants to be owners of their home, and and I've heard that there are restrictions, so I just wanted to make sure that we kind of covered, the whole layout of this process, and at the same time and make it clear that if you buy a condominium, you're also condominium fees, which is the upkeep. And you're indicating that the stewardship model with the land trust will take over those responsibilities. And of course, and you'll there's a price to pay in that, it maybe your condominium fee would be, if your mortgage is 2,000, your condo fee may be as much as 800, but through the land trust it may be as small as 400. So it's really, the stewardship model may be more appetizing to the public.
Well, we hope so.
Yeah, and as you said, yes, you got to figure out the numbers based on the amount of resources that a family or a household brings to the deal. And I think that's fair. And I think people will better appreciate the land trust model if they have some sense of how that might work to their benefit. So I'm looking forward to see what your organization in particular comes up with, because as you know, we have the condominium process that we have within the government. And so now it looks like not just co-ops, we have the co-op process. And we've thought a lot about the homeowners association. Sounds a little bit like the land trust model. So we'll be looking to generate some guidelines based on the original ideas that you will share with us as we try to govern this, because things are changing. And I love the idea that not only are the organizations you're working with thinking about the need for flexibility, but our government has to be a little more nimble so that we can adjust to the times and make sure that we continue a community that's thriving, so to speak. So I appreciate that. I know I've spent a lot of time with you. That's because of your expertise.
Oh,
And
well,
so thank you very much, Ms. Slater, for this time. I have many, many more questions, but I might send you a list. But I do need to ask you if we can get the information that is required about your personal finances as a part of the record.
I sent it in, but I can send it in again.
Okay, if you sent it to the committee, that would be fine. It would be included in our record. So just want to make sure we have that.
Okay, I will look into what happened to that, because I recently sent that in, but.
Okay. All right. So thank you. Thank you very, very much.
Oh, it's been an honor, Councilwoman. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So now we will, let's see. I got so many papers here. We will now receive testimony from Mr. Charles Lowry, who is the second renominee for the position of board member for the Housing Production Trust Fund. Mr. Lowry, I see you're in the room.
I'm here. I'm here.
All right, welcome.
Chairperson Bonds, thank you very much. You guys
and now I have to swear you in now that you're here.
That's right.
All right. So let me get to my sheet. Well, I'll just go right ahead. Do you swear and affirm that the testimony that you make before the committee today is in fact accurate and complete?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much. And now we'll hear from you.
Okay. Chairperson Bonds, I wanted to thank you again for this opportunity, but it was interesting, the discussion you've had with Suzanne is really covers so much of what we are doing in the trust fund. So I'll just add my 2 cents here and glad to take questions afterwards. But good afternoon. I'd like to thank Chairperson Bonds and members of the Committee on Housing and Executive Administration for holding this confirmation hearing. I also want to thank Mayor Bowser for allowing me this opportunity to continue to serve on the Housing Production Trust Fund. I'm excited about this opportunity to continue to serve the District of Columbia and the residents of this great city. During the past 20 plus years, I've served in a number of positions connected with the housing and mortgage industries. Way back some time ago, I was General Counsel, DC Department of Banking and Financial Institutions. And Chairperson Bonds, you may remember that during those times, the industry was really rigid in terms of dealing with communities. And we were just at the cusp of the foreclosure crisis. So the DC Department of Banking, through our work, wanted to amend the mortgage lending laws in DC. They hadn't been amended in some time. So we were able to do that and to try to stop the tide of predatory lending happening in the district. I left there and went to the Center for Responsible Lending. I also have worked at the Consumer Federation of America, and then as the Director of Fair Lending and Interim Director, National Association for the NAACP Economic Department. And I've continued to fight along the lines of lending and housing, and we tried to improve the financial status, low and moderate communities, including service members, our military members and their families. What's Chairperson Bonds, my career is sort of a compilation of different experiences, and I went from being the advocate of sort of on the outside to being on the inside, working with a company. So I worked as a Director of State Regulatory Relations for Ocwen Financial Corporation. Ocwen had not had a good reputation. It's a mortgage servicer, but yet the subprime loans that they had on their books, many people of color had loans serviced by Ocwen. My job was to go along with the senior leadership to visit state regulators to help them understand what Ocwen was doing and how Ocwen could do a better job. And I just say that I learned the servicing part of the business. And then now I'm with another company, as Director of Legislative Policy and External Affairs for New American Funding. And Chairperson Bonds, you may know that in that housing arena, that the banks have pulled back in terms of the work that they're doing. So you have a lot of the independent mortgage bankers. These are sometimes mom and pop, they're small operations. Our company is about the 25th largest mortgage origination company in the country. But what I learned by moving to my current position is that we're working to increase home ownership opportunities across the country. And we do that through initiatives like New American Dream, which is focused on increasing Black home ownership, and then Latino Focus, which is also designed to help the Hispanic and Latino community. And why I think this is important, Chairperson Bonds, is because we sit here right in DC, and there are lots of things that are going on around us that are models that are taking place across the country. But I would say that I am really proud of the Housing Production Trust Fund, Suzanne's leadership, Director Donaldson, because I think we're, as a community, leading the effort across the country. two things also I'd like to say is that the National Housing Conference, I believe, Chairperson Bonds, I saw you at the ribbon cutting, or the announcement about the additional monies. I was just going to say that, and I wanted to share with you as things become more public about the national movement to increase minority home ownership. There are investors, mortgage lenders, civil rights groups that all are under umbrella of the National Housing Conference. And that group has an initiative called, what is it called? It's 3 by 2030. And they're roll that out. They've talked to Secretary Marsha Fudge, talking to other leaders. But their goal is to increase home ownership Black home ownership by 3 million households in 2030. And but because there are ideas that are all in these meetings, right, about how to accomplish. And I think that that's what I'd like to share on our board, as well as share with you and your staff, because we could benefit by seeing what general things are coming up. So there's also another group with the MBA called, the MBA is the Mortgage Bankers Association. They have an initiative. Their president has an initiative to increase minority home ownership. So she is really out of the social justice issues we've been facing. Companies like, or organizations like the MBA are seeing the need to increase ownership. So just to say that that's part of my background in terms of what I've done. You've already mentioned my academic background. I won't that, but I do want to say that I just am excited about being reappointed. I'm excited to be working with Suzanne. I think maybe a couple of years now, Suzanne, we came to your office to talk about the housing production trust. So we really are advocates for it and supporters for it and want to work with you. And as you know, the mayor announced the supplemental budget, which would add $150 million to the Housing Production Trust Fund, and her proposed budget for fiscal year 2022 has $250 million invested. So we know that that's a one-time investment of $100 million. I'm excited to join my fellow board members. I think we have a great board, and Director Polly Donaldson and her staff at DHCD help carry out the mayor's vision and goals for the Housing Production Trust Fund, including her goal to create 36,000 new homes, to affirmatively further fair housing, and to expand home opportunities. And one thing as I close, Chairperson Bonds, our company is finding homes for people in the Southeast, like where the prices are cheaper, right, for affordable homes there. There's land there, and they're making inroads in terms of turning people from renters into homeowners. But our challenge is different here, right? And we don't have land to build on. I mean, there's not that much that's available, like it's available in the suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia. But that gives us a different challenge. And I know we have the area median income requirements, but I just feel like we're making progress, sort of trudging along. And I'm just happy to be a part of that team. I want to thank you, Chairperson Bonds, for your leadership in this housing arena. It's so very important for us to be in sync and working together on this. And that's all I have. And I'd just like to conclude my testimony, and I welcome your question.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Lowry. And I guess I have to add that I obviously wrote your testimony as well.
Great.
It is very nice to have you and Ms. Slater before the committee because of the important roles that you play. And so in helping us to deliver more affordable units. And as you said, we've got to crack down on that 0 to 30% where the need is the greatest. And of course, the task tends to be more difficult because of the costs and where do you get the money? And the lending institutions do not particularly favor funding those kinds of projects. You also mentioned that the banks had pulled back Can you just talk a little bit about that? Give us some education as to what's going on in the banking industry.
Sure. This is just seems like it's been a trend for the depository institutions, the Bank of America, the Chase, and Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo is still a huge lender, but when you look at the HMDA data, Chairperson Bonds, you'll see that companies like Quicken, Quicken is always on the radio, it's always on TV. They're doing a lot of refinancing, also, well, mainly refinancing in that respect, but they are very much involved in the housing area. So I think from my understanding, it's that the risk involved has really banks shy away from, or maybe it's a fair, it could be that instead of pulling away, they could strongly join our effort to provide home ownership. But I think their leadership has been pulling back on the opportunity to originate loans. So what's happened is the companies like Quicken or Mr. Cooper or our company, is United Health Wholesale Mortgage. These companies are coming up with the capital and information, Chairperson Bonds, to really offer opportunities. And I just wanted to say that there was last year in 2020, we 8.2% of our loans went to Black buyers, and the national average was under 5%. So we're doing, even though we're smaller, we're making efforts to really get out to these communities and offer home ownership, and also so that people know they don't have to rent. As Suzanne mentioned, people were paying so much more in rent than they would for mortgage, right? So there's this incredible challenge I think we have, right, of working that 0 to 30 and trying to really help people in the homes. There are higher income communities of color here in DC that may not know the opportunity in terms of interest rates and down payment assistance. So we want to educate those people and bring them into the home ownership area as well.
Well, I'm glad that you are zeroing in on the district, because it seems to me you're saying 8% of your lending dollars go to minority or Black, households. And I wonder how you would address a community like the district, where approximately nearly 50% are Black households, of which at least a third have the capacity to be home ownership opportunities. And so, how do we do that? I mean, how do you see, or do you see the trust fund moving in a direction that would lend itself more to ownership opportunities?
That's such a big challenge, as I was saying, that these affordable markets that are around the country, we're sort of one of the least affordable, right, places to be. And so how do we deal with that challenge? I think that road that we're on is a positive one. I think that there's so much, Chairperson Bonds, that has to be put into it, like work you're doing, the work we're doing, work that New American Funding is. It's like connecting the dots and really trying to find the student, our millennials and the student loan debt that they have, right? How do we get them out from under that debt so that they could put a down payment on a house and have a future? So I don't have the answers, but I just feel like the Housing Production Trust Fund, meets one of these needs, but we need so much. And what Suzanne is doing at Habitat for Humanity, we have to stitch all this together, right, to be successful.
I have a big question for you, and I failed to speak with Ms. Slater about this, and
Okay.
that is density necessarily the cause of adverse effects such as displacement and gentrification? And when you think about the utilization of the dollars, does that come into play? the utilization of the dollars in the trust fund.
Can you give me that again? That's a question.
I know what I'm asking is, because most of our projects in the trust fund are about increasing density in a community, and that's the ultimate result. Does this process or product that is produced, does it really lead to displacement or gentrification?
I think
Or not either one?
I think that's a very interesting challenge. I remember being on the Housing Finance Agency board, and some of the developments were there, and the low and moderate income units that they had available. Well, if they didn't advertise them fully and broadly, oftentimes you had a young person who worked on the Hill met the income requirements, but then they ended up pushing out, right, the diversity of other people that could be in that position. So I think that's something that we have to be aware of, and density question is such a challenge here in the district. I don't have one answer, but I do think that
I've heard from individuals, and some collectively, express an opinion that the manner in which we operate IZ doesn't really benefit those who have lived here long term, those who have been searching for 10, 20 years, that it does tend to benefit more of a newcomer with some resources,
right,
and with technology expertise, because the way I understand IZ works, when your number is called, you really have to be back in touch within a matter of minutes in order to be in the first 3 or 4 pecking order, because housing is such a jewel in our community. And it doesn't like hang around and wait for you to get off from your job and then see the message and say, oh, I'll call now. It's too late. It's absolutely too late. So, just trying to think through, how density relates to what we're trying to accomplish. And I don't know that maintaining the existing density and trying to replace the housing in a community fares any better, because we do have that process. So just was curious as to if you had some thoughts, since you're in the financing arena.
there's so much that I'm still learning, Chairperson Bonds, and moving from the advocacy side to really a company side. You really get a chance to see. I can bring all of that information, but I'm also learning a lot. So I will continue to do that and to share with you and the vantage point, right, or the perception, or the way that I see, coupled with the rest of the board. I think we have a variety of, and we can put that together with the interests of the council and the mayor and sort of move forward. It seems like the district is doing a great job, but there's so much more to do, right? There's so much more.
All right, thank you. What differences does the Housing Production Trust Fund make in a subsidy? Can you quantify the impacts of these investments?
I don't know. The investments you're speaking of,
that we would use the trust fund dollars for, yes.
yeah, I don't know that I have an answer to that.
Okay.
That proposals are presented, are being thoroughly vetted, trying to make decisions in a large variety of communities, right? Not just in almost the more dense of our communities, but really spreading housing opportunity.
Okay, so the trust fund dollars are really making reality for many households because it's restricted to 0 to 80% of the family median income. And I think the family median income now is about 126,000 for our area. And in the city itself, I think we're at about 90, maybe a little higher, 90,000. So you can see what kind of dollars we're really speaking of. And remember, this, of course, is for a family of 4. So individually, 0 to 30 is in the neighborhood of about 42,000. And as you add numbers of babies, it can be more generous, but it's really in our region. I think the last study I saw about what the cost of living will buy you, you really end up needing close to 60,000 to really, with a family of 4, to really, I can't say thrive, but certainly to continue to have a livelihood here. And so I wanted to ask a little bit about that. But have you, as a member of the trust board, given thought to how we might finance projects that protect our senior citizens?
I can't say that Chairperson Bonds in our meetings directly. I think it's another look at our community, right? You can slice it different ways. And so our seniors are others and those that have been around for a long time. But I think that I see the staff working hard to get these projects primed and ready to go. And I think that there's so much of a need that I know could look into how to protect the senior community.
Well, one thought that I had is that while we're saying that we want to make sure 0 to 30% is well represented with 50% of the funding that comes through the trust fund into the projects to fuel our affordable housing goals. I'm wondering if we need to also look at a portion of dollars that are utilized would be reserved and used, devoted to creating units, whether they're renovated units or remodeled units or new construction units that would be devoted to persons at age 60 and above. Because I fear that that's the group that will always be left out if timing in order to use IZ is a challenge. It's almost like we have to reserve room for that category. So I just wondered if any thought had been given to a program like that or what have you.
Can't say that we discussed that specifically, Chairperson Bonds, but I think we could begin to look at that and to see how can we continue to be creative. That pool of money, it seems like a lot, but it still needs to go to make it go as far as it can, right? So it's really
it does. And I'm assuming this 150 million supplemental dollars are the dollars that automatically fell into the trust fund, which is a requirement of law where 50% of your surplus automatically goes into. Yeah, that's what I'm assuming. Okay. Mr. Lowry, what are you most proud of from your tenure on the board? And what are your specific areas of priority?
I think that, as I've stated, Chairperson Bonds, I really feel that I bring the viewpoints of other groups, into the discussion about the Housing Production Trust Fund and who's doing what across the country. For example, our company had a down payment assistance webinar, and the state housing finance agencies are mainly the ones that receive the federal government money. We had the executive director from that organization, state housing finance agencies, to talk to us about down payment assistance programs. So I think that my credit and debt challenges, I think that my perception, I've seen what's going on around the country, and how can we take the best practices that we've seen and apply them to the Housing Production Trust Fund. So that's what I'm passionate about. I believe in this work. I think it's so important. And Suzanne Slater mentioned how the stability, and maybe you did too, the stability of families in a house and what that means to that family, what it means to the future of that block, what it means to the future of our community. So I just like to continue to bring my ideas to the table, and also share other ideas that I've heard about from the district.
So, Mr. Lowry, do you see one of the benefits of being on the board to help you help those who are applying to find funding, exterior private funding, or resources that might be open to assisting us in this manner?
Yeah, I think I always want to feel that I'm following the right protocol, but working with Director Donaldson and her staff to really be creative and to look at that. I think there's so much that has to be done to get over the hurdle of home ownership. But I think that there are tools and more tools that are coming out of companies and out of the government, so that we can help become homeowners, but also, Bonds, we need to help them stay in homes, right? So that they don't.
Yes.
We don't want people to have gotten a bad loan, or we want them to be able to sustain themselves and not lose their home.
Okay. Well, of course, you know that the city received, I think we already have it, but about $50 million to make sure that we can handle any foreclosure type situation. So I would assume that you might have a say in some of that. The processes can help us make sure we're using as best practices as much as possible.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, I have to ask if you have also submitted your personal financial information.
I think I still need to do that, Chairperson Bonds. I'll try to make sure I get that correct information and submit it. Yes.
Yes, I won't bore you all now with the 25 questions. So if you could get this in, please, and if you could get this in, quite honestly, by Monday, that would be very helpful to us.
Yeah, we'll do that.
So we can file it with our report.
Right. Glad to do.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and again, thank you to Ms. Slater for her testimony. And thank you, Mr. Lowry. Thank you. We will now turn our final measure to the final measure on the agenda, PR 24-201. That is Dr. Amber Hewitt, Chief Equity Officer, Confirmation Act of 2021. The Office of Racial Equity was established by the Racial Equity Archives Results REACH Act of 2020. The REACH Amendment Act was enacted on December 7, 2020. The act created the Office of Racial Equity within the Office of the City Administrator, and the act provided that the creation of the Chief Equity Officer would be responsible for establishing a structure to develop, provide oversight of, and advance the district's goals towards achieving racial equity. Under the act, the appointment of the Chief Equity Officer would be deemed approved by August 1, 2021, without council action. Dr. Hewitt, who is the first ever nominee for the position, possesses a strong background in health policy and academia. Her accomplishments include she's taught at American University, the Catholic University of America, as well as Simmons University. She also served as a fellow in the U.S. Senate and as the Director of Health Equity at Families USA prior to joining the district government. Dr. Hewitt holds a PhD in philosophy from Loyola University of Chicago and an MA in philosophy from Boston University and ABS from the University of Southern California in biology and biological sciences. Dr. Hewitt also served on the district's Commission of Fathers, Men, and Boys until December 2020. I understand that we have several public witnesses that have signed up to provide testimony in support of Dr. Hewitt's nomination, and we would like to hear their testimony at this time if they are in the room. Staff, do we have our...
Councilmember, I just promoted them. We have two public witnesses today, Sana Shahimi and Elliot Fishman. And I believe Miss Shahimi is the first.
Okay, Ms. Shahimi, you can begin when you are ready.
Thank you so much, Chairperson Bonds and members and staff of the Committee on Housing and Executive Administration for the opportunity to share my testimony today. My name is Sana Shahimi. I am the DC-based Policy Director for Prevention Institute, and we're a national nonprofit dedicated to promoting health, safety, and well-being through thriving, equitable communities. And on behalf of Prevention Institute, I want to wholeheartedly support Dr. Hewitt's appointment as the district's first Chief Equity Officer for the Office of Racial Equity. I've worked for Prevention Institute for over 17 years and in the public health field for over 2 decades. And during this time, I've been really fortunate to meet and collaborate with many outstanding leaders and advocates working to advance equitable policies and practices. I'm sharing my testimony today because Dr. Hewitt's leadership and contributions to social justice, racial justice, and health equity stand out. I first met Dr. Hewitt when she was a legislative fellow on the health and education policy team with Senator Booker's office back in 2016. I had scheduled a meeting to share a framework that Prevention Institute had developed to address and prevent community-level trauma. During this initial meeting, I was really impressed by the extent of Dr. Hewitt's engagement. She asked thoughtful, probing questions about the framework's practical applications to advance racial justice and health equity, and she brought in her own community experiences as a psychologist. Sometimes these visits can feel very perfunctory, and that was certainly not the case. After the meeting, she followed up with further recommendations and questions to strengthen the implication of the framework in more communities. And from that day, we kept in touch regularly. And our professional circles began to intersect ever more after she accepted a policy position with the Nemours Children's Health System, and then during her tenure as the Director of Health Equity for Families USA. While at Families USA, Dr. Hewitt led the Health Equity Task Force for Delivery and Payment Transformation, which she invited me to join to provide an additional public health and prevention lens. Participating on this national task force gave me additional opportunities to experience Dr. Hewitt's leadership up close. Dr. Hewitt brings an authentically collaborative approach to her work, which makes the process and the end results better and stronger. During her time leading the task force, we were tasked to work together to prepare racial equity-focused policy priorities and recommendations for the incoming administration and Congress. This was no small feat considering the many individual priorities of the various task force members and our organizations. Through careful listening and engagement, Dr. Hewitt was able to home in on shared themes and priorities that would add the greatest value and impact coming from the task force. She was able to make sure that we applied an intentional anti-racist and intersectional lens and analysis in our collective work. In Prevention Institute's own work with local governments and community-based organizations and networks, it has given us some insights into the leadership qualities and skills necessary to collaboratively move the needle on racial justice work. And I wanna say that Dr. Hewitt has these leadership qualities and skills. She approaches her work with courage, conviction, and rigor. She is deeply collaborative. She knows how to listen, engage, and cultivate a sense of shared buy-in. She knows how to leverage available data and practice-based evidence. And as importantly, she knows when the data and evidence are lacking. She's also not afraid to directly address and work through the tensions that are inevitable in this work. I have no doubt that Dr. Hewitt will be a strong and effective equity champion for the Office of Racial Equity and the residents of the District of Columbia. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share my testimony today.
Thank you very much for your testimony. And now I will recognize Mr. Fishman for your testimony, sir.
Thank you, Chairperson Bonds. And it is really a distinct honor to play a small part in Washington, D.C.'s historic creation of a Chief Equity Officer position. This is really of national significance. And I'll start by just describing my own role. I'm the Policy Director at Families USA. We are based in D.C. We're a nonprofit policy and advocacy organization focused on healthcare and specifically on healthcare justice issues. And Dr. Hewitt was, until taking up her new role in the district, our Director of Health Equity. So I worked very closely with her. And I look forward to continuing to work with her in her new role, in obviously a very different capacity. I wanted to start by speaking to Dr. Hewitt's personal qualities. And you have in her someone who combines a burning passion for social justice with a careful and methodical personal approach. And what I'd say broadly about her is that she'll be a judicious partner and careful and when necessary, a discreet partner, but that she did not come to play. And she's someone who held Families USA accountable, and I think will hold the district accountable for following through on the vision behind the creation of this office. And I want to specifically note in that context that the District of Columbia has real challenges around health equity. There are stark inequities in healthcare access and in population health in the district. And in some ways, important ways, those inequities have gotten worse rather than better in recent years. In particular, the fact that Dr. Hewitt has a primary background in healthcare policy, I think is a great advantage for this role, but it also ought to set expectations for her leadership in working with the council and with the mayor for turning around in demonstrable ways the inequities that Washington, D.C. currently has around healthcare, among other issues. So I will say, not just as a former colleague and great admirer of Dr. Hewitt, but also as a healthcare advocate, that the fact that the district has chosen a health policy expert as a potential chief equity officer, I think is of great importance and has enormous potential to improve the lives and well-being of the people of the District of Columbia.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Fishman, and thank you to Ms. Shinemi. I really appreciate your testimonies, and you've offered a tremendous challenge to Dr. Hewitt. We are expecting that she will turn around our health demerits that we currently are existing with. We are also expecting that she will understand this arena that's fairly new across the country, and that's racial equity. How do you address it, and how do you change what has contributed to an inequitable existence in community, and make it more equitable and certainly more inviting to those that feel that they've been left out and forgotten. So thank you both for your testimony. Thank you. So we will now call on Dr. Hewitt, if she is in the room, to get her testimony. All right. Welcome, welcome. And because you are an officer, I have to swear you in. So if you will raise your right hand. Do you swear and affirm that the testimony and any statements that you make before us today are truthful and complete?
Yes, I do.
All right, thank you. And again, welcome. And you can begin you can begin when you're ready. Okay.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, Chairperson Bonds and members and staff of the Committee on Housing and Executive Administration. I am Dr. Amber Hewitt, Acting Director of the Office of Racial Equity, and I'm honored to have been nominated by Mayor Bowser to be the District of Columbia's first Chief Equity Officer. And I would welcome the opportunity to discuss my background and experiences and vision for the office. I have over 10 years of professional experience in higher education, health services, and public policy. And as you alluded to in my bio, I began my career as a tenure-track psychology professor, where I helped to train future psychologists to apply an anti-racist lens in their work with clients and families. As an academic, I also developed a psychoeducational intervention for Black boys, designed to facilitate critical consciousness and promote positive racial identity development. My scholarly work emphasized a move toward decolonizing the field. In other words, moving away from only looking at the individual to sociocultural factors like racial oppression that impact health and well-being. About 3 years into my faculty position, I was awarded a fully funded and competitively selected fellowship by the American Psychological Association and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. In the fall of 2016, I matched in the office of U.S. Senator Cory Booker, where I was the lead staffer who shepherded the introduction and passage of the bipartisan sickle cell disease and other heritable blood disorders research, surveillance, prevention, and treatment act of 2018. Working on this bill illuminated the stark racial health inequities for patients diagnosed with sickle cell disease. My experience working on health policy on Capitol Hill solidified my desire to continue advocating for policies that aim to eliminate racial inequities. After my fellowship in the Senate, I served as a science policy fellow at the National Institute of Mental Health before transitioning to Nemours Children's Health System. At Nemours, I directly lobbied Congress and administration on a variety of child health policy issues. My experience at Nemours helped to prepare me for my role as Director of Health Equity at Families USA, a national health advocacy organization. In this role, I chaired a national health equity task force, which included members such as the Prevention Institute, the NAACP, National Urban League, Unidos US, and the Asian and Pacific Islander American Health Forum. At Families USA, I was able to hone my skills in coalition building, managing strategic partnerships, policy analysis, and strategic communications, all of which will be vital in the role of Chief Equity Officer. I also bring to this role my experience as a former Ward 2 and now Ward 6 resident. I had the pleasure of serving my community in a variety of ways, including being appointed in 2017 to the Commission on Fathers, Men, and Boys. And my fondest memory serving as a commissioner was the opportunity to travel with Mayor Bowser to Selma, Alabama, to commemorate the anniversary of Bloody Sunday. 56 years later, after that historic event, the racial justice goals that many lost their lives, endured beatings, or were imprisoned unjustly are still not realized. In the words of Dr. King, there is a fierce urgency of now for the work of the Office of Racial Equity. In the few months I've been acting director, many have asked about my vision for the office. The vision will build upon the mayor's priorities and existing agency strategies and goals. Racial equity, nevertheless, requires prioritizing the lived experiences, the voices, and the needs of those most affected by racial inequities. So my goal is to foster a collective vision, one that includes the following: acknowledging the cumulative and ongoing impact of historical trauma on communities of color, namely Black people living in the district, acknowledging the intersections of race and other social categories or experiences, analyzing which communities will benefit and which communities will be harmed by policy decisions according to race, targeting solutions and distribution of resources to residents that have experienced systemic and institutional oppression. When we talk about racial equity, we mean both a process and an outcome. As an outcome, racial equity is the condition where race no longer predicts opportunities, outcomes, or the distribution of resources for residents of the district, particularly Black residents. Racial equity is also about the presence of justice. For example, the creation of racially just policies, practices, attitudes, and cultural messages, repairing harm, and the elimination of structures that reinforce differential experiences and outcomes by race. The mission of the Office of Racial Equity is to eliminate racial equities in the district by providing leadership, guidance, and technical assistance to engage and embed the concepts of racial equity into all facets of daily operations. Doing so will improve the quality of life for all residents, especially Black residents and residents of color. The office will utilize a four-part theory of change: normalize, organize, operationalize, and assess. We will begin by normalizing conversations around race, racism, and racial equity. After normalizing has begun, we will begin organizing by building up both our internal and external capacity, including building partnerships with external stakeholders across various sectors. To operationalize racial equity, we will work to explicitly incorporate racial equity tools into operations through the development of toolkits and trainings. And finally, we will measure and track our progress through a data-driven approach. Ultimately, we are driving toward practice change to ensure that our current operations do not maintain or perpetuate racial inequities. In accomplishing this work, I will of course be working with agencies that already develop toolkits and trainings, that already measure results, and that already run programs that advance racial equity. One of my first tasks on the organizing prong will be to formulate a measurement and data strategy to enable the development of DC's first racial equity dashboard. I envision this to be a collaborative process with citizen experts, external stakeholders, and district leadership. I also look forward to partnering with the Office of Human Rights, the DC Department of Human Resources in designing a racial equity training series that will both help with the normalizing of conversations around race and with operationalizing change. Central to the work of the office will be community engagement and tapping into the wisdom of our citizen experts and honoring their assets and contributions. In addition to the other provisions outlined in the REACH Act, the office will work with agencies to develop racial equity action plans. Critical to the success of these plans is a root cause analysis of the underlying factors driving racial inequities. I am confident in district leadership and my colleagues across the executive to carry out this work. I'm also confident in my abilities to facilitate this process with my future team. I am pleased to be a part of a team of directors who have already carefully assessed health equity and maternal and child health, who've already focused on equitable opportunities for housing across neighborhoods, who have already built equity into transportation and environmental planning. And I hope together we will turbocharge these plans and put known solutions and new ones into action. So I'm humbled about the opportunity to lead the Office of Racial Equity, and I look forward to collaborating with district agencies, residents, and external stakeholders to create a more racially equitable city. Again, I'd like to extend my gratitude to Mayor Bowser for nominating me. And I'd be remiss if I did not thank my creator, my ancestors, my parents, local racial justice advocates, and all those names who we do not know, who died fighting for me to have the opportunity to serve in this position. So Madam Chair, I thank you for this opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Dr. Hewitt, thank you so very much for that very moving testimony, I must say. I think everyone has been curious as to what would be your role. How are you going to bring the elements that make up this great community together so that we can say, aha, we understand what racial equity is and how it can be applied in order to make a more quality community. So thank you very much. And I'm speaking for myself, obviously. I appreciate your testimony so very, very much. I wanted to just ask a few questions really about how you envision racial equity being furthered in the district as it relates to addressing any identified, let's start with education, housing, because they too are a part of this health conundrum that we're trying to wrestle with. So how do you see that? What can we do? What are some of the things that we can change immediately to make it a more quality community?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that question. And coming from the health equity space, it is true that, you know, what drives health and healthcare outcomes, 80% of that happens outside of, you know, the walls of the healthcare system, such as, you know, education, transportation, you mentioned housing. So I think we have to have a collective and a holistic approach. And you alluded to the curiosity about my role. And I see this role as in part leaning on the expertise of the heads of agencies and the deputy mayors, as well as coordinating and fostering cross-agency collaboration. So I think one of the opportunities and challenges is to coordinate existing racial equity initiatives, because we don't live in silos. Education doesn't happen in silos. You know, kids actually have to get to school safely. We saw investments in this FY22 budget around micro transit and safe passage to schools. When we talk about housing, I know you just had a robust conversation on the Housing and Production Trust Fund and those critical investments that will have both immediate and long-term impact. So I look forward to working with district leaders across the agency. And when we look at the budget, they're critical investments in both of these areas around education and housing that will have both immediate and long-term impact. However, part of this office is to measure our impact. So I'm focused on implementation and impact. And I alluded to one of the first parts of my journey in this office and with my future team, which we're actively recruiting for, is developing a measurement and a data strategy. So we know what the racial inequities are, across the district. So, racial gaps in housing and education will be one of several areas that my office will focus on. However, in order to implement change and improve outcomes, we have to have a measurement and data strategy. So that's one of the things that I'm looking forward to. For example, looking at housing, what are our district-wide indicators of housing? In addition to preserving affordable housing, producing more affordable units, what about displacement and quality, the quality of our housing? How do we respond to the pressures of gentrification? How do we revitalize communities without with preserving the cultural, significance of those communities? How do we balance that with cultural and physical displacement? So right now, I'm focused on doing a landscape analysis of existing racial equity initiatives. We'll be working closely with the Office of Budget and Performance Management to incorporate racial equity into our performance management systems, and going through a process where we ask the question, what is our racial equity outcome for this effort? So when we look at housing and we look at education, what is our racial equity outcome? How are we engaging stakeholders? I was recently interviewed in an article and I said, I am not the Office of Racial Equity. This isn't about me. This is about our residents and our neighbors who are most affected by the inequities, and coming up with a plan based on the data to look at our current policies and practices to address equity gaps. So right now I'm focused on the infrastructure and the process to look at our current policies and procedures and to track our progress over time. But I'm very excited to meet and continue to have a conversations with the Deputy Mayor of Education and the Deputy Mayor of Planning and Economic Development about both short-term and long-term racial equity impacts in those areas.
Well, you have a tremendous challenge. Sounds like you will be pushing and tugging and moving people and processes in order to get us to understand that maybe some of the things that we have had in play have not really benefited the whole of the community. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing your work, in fact, seeing your work magic in our community, to be very honest with you. Thank you for that. Let me you mentioned displacement, and with displacement, there's always the talk of gentrification. And so do you have any strong indications as to whether or not gentrification is continuing to advance in the city, or is it kind of at a pause at this time?
Well, I would want to look at the current data on that. What I can say is that the pressure of gentrification is real, and looking at this through a racial equity lens, looking at the disproportionate impact on Black residents. So I would want to look at the data there, along with maybe having more conversations with Director Trueblood, Director Donaldson, on what data that they're seeing, since they are closer to the data for that issue. And that could be something that could be included in the racial equity action plans that agencies face. So I can't give an exact answer on that, but I do acknowledge the pressures of gentrification. And how can we, the question and challenge will be, how can we center racial equity as we work to invest in communities? I think there are racially equitable strategies that could buffer cultural and physical displacement.
Okay. I love the idea of how do we invest in communities and we uplift the culture of that neighborhood. I think knowing a little bit about the city long term, I can recall that there was a lot of neighborhood pride from neighborhood to neighborhood, and so that's sort of a part of our culture. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays out. I think at one time, Dr. Hewitt, we thought we had about 78 different neighborhoods. Of course, they're more condensed now. But certainly there was a lot of pride. And so it would be interesting to see how we utilize those facts from the past and make them as something of a composite that can advance us into the future. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Can we just talk real quick about the post-pandemic employment and the lack of certainty within the community with disrespect and mental impacts? How do we engage local businesses and the broader business community to ensure racial equity outcomes?
To ensure racial equity outcomes economically, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the question.
Yes, it is economically, yes, so that we can
Okay.
have better, can raise the quality of living in communities. As you know, I guess our lowest income populations tend to be those that are constantly fighting discrimination. And so just wanted you to speak on that for a minute, please.
Yes, well, it's a very serious issue. And as you noted, the pandemic exacerbated both health and economic outcomes. So this is a critical time to address that issue. I was able to attend a kickoff meeting for the Deputy Mayor's Office of Planning and Economic Development. They recently launched a disparity study to look at just that, the impact of contracting and procurement on women and minority-owned businesses. So that is an effort that's underway. And I've already met with the project manager and the DIMPAD's chief of staff and offered my office as a resource. I've also had a chance to meet with some of our external stakeholders, like the Urban Institute, who are supporting DIMPAD on an upward mobility project. And they're working on establishing economic indicators and making sure those indicators are disaggregated by race. And that's critical. How we're going to answer your question, Councilmember Bonds, if we don't have the right metrics and if those metrics aren't disaggregated by race. So I have been sitting in those meetings as well. And that information could feed up into the district's first racial equity dashboard, where we want this to be a tool to track our progress internally, but we also want this dashboard to have utility to our neighbors and to our residents. So community and stakeholder, inclusive community and stakeholder engagement will be sort of a through line for all the processes of the Office of Racial Equity. So those are some initial thoughts on that, but happy to speak to you further about more ideas.
Oh, I appreciate that very much, because one of the concerns I always feel that I'm faced with is there is the anecdotal information, and then there is the data, and then there is, where did the data come from? How old is it? Is it fresh? Is it, quantitatively? Those kinds of issues. And just so you know, I had a conversation this morning with Director Trueblood just about this. And I'm like, we as a government and we as a community really need to have real truths presented and worked on, as opposed to, our own individual, thoughts about these matters. So
Absolutely. And if I have to follow up on that, council member, that's to me going to be the most fun challenge of this job. I love data and racial equity being the lens, and being data driven as the approach is sort of the peanut butter and jelly, if you will, of our focus. And that's really important. When we talk about data, we are talking about qualitative and quantitative data, but like you said, making sure that the data is making sure that our metrics are aligned with the available data, identifying potential proxy data. So I think there are challenges, but I think there are lots of opportunities that I'm excited to explore.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And while you're exploring that, this may be a little out of your realm, but could you look into an issue that was brought to my attention where there are some persons in community that believe the Stay DC program is really designed to collect data on individual tenants that will then be utilized by the housing provider or development community. And can you check on that matter for me?
Yes, I will definitely look into that, and my colleagues across the executive who handle that issue more intimately. And I just want to validate, those folks' concerns. And I know that's something that comes up, a lot with data, data collection, our undocumented neighbors and residents, and that cultural mistrust is a real thing. So I just want to validate that. And yes, I will look into that, the Stay DC program in relation to the data collection.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And I believe you have provided your personal information. Okay. And it'll be a part of our record. And although we, the council, do not have the great opportunity to officially confirm you, I thought it would be very valuable, since you're in the city administrator's office, that everyone has an opportunity to meet you and understand what your goals are and the work that is ahead of you, and hopefully available to lend any assistance that you may need from the public and from the government at large, and certainly from us at the council. So looking forward to your confirmation, so to speak. And so welcome to the government.
Thank you so much, council member. It's an honor to speak with you today.
Thank you. Well, I believe this concludes our hearing today. And want everyone to know that the record will close officially at 5 p.m. on June 23rd, 2021. The next meeting of the committee will be a budget oversight hearing on June 16th for the following agencies: the DC Housing Authority, public witnesses only, and then all witnesses for the Office of the Secretary, the Office of Senior Advisor, and the Real Property Tax Appeals Commission. With that said, the time is now 2:06 p.m. and we are